Imagine standing in a crowded courtroom, accused of stealing by the wealthiest man in town, his cold eyes fixed on you as if your fate is already sealed. The sound of whispers circling like knives in the air. You have no lawyer, no family by your side, no shield to protect you, only the crushing weight of judgment pressing down from every corner of the room. And then, in the middle of that silence, you feel it. The tight grip of two small hands clutching your apron, his own sons holding on to you as if their lives depended on it. Their father sits across the room, untouchable, wrapped in power, surrounded by a wall of lawyers ready to destroy you with a single word. But when those boys rose to their feet, their chairs scraping against the floor, the entire courtroom froze, waiting to hear the truth that could shatter everything he built. The courtroom went still. Every eye was on the boys. Their father leaned forward, his jaw tight, his lawyers whispering at his side. The maid's hands shook against her apron, her breath shallow as if the weight of the whole world pressed against her chest. Then one of the boys tugged at her sleeve and whispered, his voice barely above a breath, "Don't worry, we know the truth." Across the table, the billionaire hissed at his sons, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Sit down, now." But they didn't. Their small voices carried across the courtroom, stronger than anyone expected. The younger one spoke first, his words trembling but clear. "Daddy, she didn't do it." A gasp rippled through the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching across their pads. The judge slammed his gavel once, calling for order. But nothing could stop the tension that had already cracked the air in two. "Real quick, y'all, I gotta pause this for a second. Where are you tuning in from?" I see New York in the comments heavy, Cali holding it down, Texas always reppin'. Drop your city right now. And let me ask you this, if your own kids saw you lie in court, would they keep quiet for you, or stand up and tell the truth? Before the trial, before the gavel slammed and the room went still, her life had already been a fight. Every morning, while the sky over Los Angeles was still dark, she was already awake. Coffee in a chipped mug, shoes worn thin. She'd drive her old Honda down Sunset, past billboards shining with faces of the rich and powerful, past stores she could never step into. The engine rattled the whole way to Beverly Hills, but it always got her there. It had to. Inside the mansion, the air smelled of money. The marble floors stretched for miles, polished until you could see your own reflection. She scrubbed them on her knees until her back ached, her rags soaked with bleach. Upstairs, the sound of laughter and music would roll down like thunder. Another party, another night of champagne glasses clinking and cameras flashing. She kept her head low, sliding between shadows, collecting the glasses, washing away the proof of their excess. The contrast followed her everywhere. Out front, her Honda Civic sat crooked in the driveway, squeezed between Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Rolls-Royces. Their engines purred like wild animals, lined up as if they were meant to remind her of where she stood. She'd grip her keys tighter every night as she walked past them, whispering to herself, "Just work. Just make it through another day." Her gloves smelled of bleach, no matter how hard she washed her hands. Her palms were raw, her skin cracked. The billionaire's wife, meanwhile, floated through the halls in silk gowns, her heels clicking softly across the marble, her perfume trailing behind her like it owned the air. Sometimes when they passed, the wife would glance at her as though she wasn't a person at all, just another piece of furniture, just another tool in the house. But there was one thing that kept her heart alive in that place: the children, the billionaire's sons. She treated them with a warmth their parents rarely showed. She made them sandwiches when the kitchen staff had gone home. She sneaked cookies into their small hands, whispering, "Don't tell your mom," while they giggled. On nights when the parents were out at galas, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the hum of the fridge, she sat by their bedsides, book in hand, reading until their eyes closed. One night, the younger boy tugged at her sleeve. "Why do you smile at us even when Mommy yells at you?" She tucked the blanket tighter around him and smiled. "Because, sweetheart, you deserve love no matter what." The older one, his small face peeking from across the room, asked, "Even if Daddy says you're just the maid?" She froze for a moment. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "Even then? Maybe especially then." The boys looked at her differently after that. They laughed louder when she was near. They clung to her apron when the house felt cold. In their eyes, she wasn't just a maid. She was comfort, she was safety, she was someone who cared. And that bond, forged in stolen cookies and whispered bedtime stories, would become the reason everything changed. Because when the moment came, when the courtroom fell silent and their father's power filled the air like smoke, those boys didn't see a servant accused of theft. They saw the woman who stayed when no one else did. The night of the gala was louder than any before. Cars lined the driveway, black suits and glittering gowns spilling out into the marble halls. Cameras flashed at the door, reporters shouting names, the house alive with champagne and secrets. She moved quietly through the chaos, tray in hand, her eyes low, just another shadow in a house built for the powerful. Then the music cut. A sharp voice rose above the chatter. The billionaire's wife. Her tone cold, slicing through the crowd like glass. "My bracelet is gone. Somebody check her room. That's where it'll be." Every head turned. All eyes landed on the maid. The crowd parted as if guilt was written on her forehead. She froze where she stood, trays shaking in her hands. Guests whispered, wine glasses tilted, faces twisted in curiosity and judgment. "I didn't take anything," she whispered, but her words drowned in the noise. The wife stepped closer, her diamond necklace catching the light, her voice sharper now. "Search her. She's the only one who could have done it." Two security guards moved fast. They grabbed her by the arm. Her tray crashed to the floor, glasses shattering against the marble. Guests gasped. Someone laughed, and then the cameras started flashing. Paparazzi had been waiting for a scandal, and now they had one. She tried to pull free. "Please, I didn't do this." But the guards dragged her out the front door. Outside, photographers shouted over one another. "The maid! The thief!" Bulbs lit up her face, tears streaking down her cheeks as the crowd pressed closer. Moments later, the police arrived. They opened her small laundry bag in front of everyone, and there it was, the diamond bracelet, glittering under the lights. Gasps erupted. The wife folded her arms, smirking like victory was hers. The billionaire shook his head slowly, disappointment painted across his face as if betrayal had cut him deep. The maid collapsed to her knees, crying, "I swear, I never touched it." But no one listened, not the guests, not the police, not even the man she had served for years. The only ones who knew the truth stood frozen in the doorway. Two little boys, his sons, their small faces pale, their hands clutching the railing as they watched their world collapse around the woman who had loved them like a mother. She had no lawyer, no family by her side, no voice loud enough to drown out the accusations. Just two children who carried the truth and the courage to speak it when no one else would. The courtroom was full to the brim, every seat taken. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras ready, pens scratching, hungry for a headline. The air felt heavy, tense, as though every person in that room was waiting to see a servant crushed beneath the weight of wealth. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, his blue suit tailored sharp, his cufflinks flashing under the lights. A smirk curved at the edge of his mouth. To him, this was already over. His attorney stood, papers in hand, voice sharp and fast. "Your Honor, the facts speak for themselves. The bracelet was found in her laundry bag. The evidence is undeniable. She's guilty. Everyone in this room knows it." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge raised a hand. "Order in the court. Let the defendant speak." The maid pushed herself up slowly, her knees trembling, her fingers pressed against the wooden table for balance. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I cleaned that house every morning before the sun came up. I washed the dishes, scrubbed the marble, and served meals I could never afford to eat. I raised his children when their own parents were too busy. But I did not steal that bracelet." The attorney scoffed. A touching speech, but lies don't wash away facts. He slapped the papers down on the table. The bracelet was in her bag, caught red-handed. The billionaire leaned forward now, his voice dripping with disdain. "She was always beneath us. I should have fired her years ago. Trash like that doesn't change." The maid's face crumpled, but she forced the words out. "Beneath you? I stayed when no one else would. I wiped your son's tears when he cried alone. I sat by their beds when your wife walked past them as if they weren't even there." She turned her eyes toward the jury, her voice breaking. "If caring for those boys makes me guilty, then so be it. But I did not take that bracelet." The judge tapped his gavel. Order. His eyes swept the room, then settled on the billionaire. She will finish. The billionaire sneered. Finish? She's finished already. Look around you. Who in this room will believe a maid over me? Money speaks. Her tears don't. Gasps and whispers erupted from the gallery. One juror shifted uncomfortably. Another shook their head. The power in the room was shifting, small but noticeable. At the front, the two boys sat close together. Their small hands clenched, their eyes darting between their father, their mother, and the maid. The younger one whispered, "What if Daddy gets mad?" The older one squeezed his hand tighter. "The truth matters. She doesn't deserve this." The younger boy's lips quivered. "He'll hate us." The older boy leaned in, his voice steady now, more certain than ever. "He already does when we stay quiet." The maid caught their eyes for the briefest moment. Her chest tightened, her throat heavy with tears she couldn't hold back. She whispered, almost to herself, "Tell them, please. Tell them." The billionaire turned sharply toward his sons, his voice cold, warning. "Not a word. Sit still. Do you hear me?" His glare was enough to silence grown men. But the boys weren't grown men. They were children who had seen the truth, children who had felt love from the woman he now tried to destroy. The attorney cleared his throat, waving the papers like a weapon. "This is simple. Bracelet in her bag. Motive clear. Why are we wasting time?" But the judge leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Sometimes the truth isn't written on paper." He turned toward the maid. "Do you have anything more to say?" She looked down at her cracked hands, the gloves she could never afford to replace. Then she lifted her head. Her voice was quiet, but it struck like thunder. "If the truth can't be found in papers, then ask his children. Ask the ones who know me." The courtroom fell silent again. All eyes turned to the boys. The billionaire's jaw tightened. His hands pressed against the table. His voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Not one word." But the older boy's grip on his brother's hand didn't loosen. His small chest rose and fell, his heart racing, but his eyes never left the maid. And for the first time that day, the billionaire looked unsure. The courtroom was heavy with silence. The boys sat pressed against the maid, their hands gripping hers so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Their father's command still echoed, "Not one word." The threat hung in the air like a noose. The younger one leaned in, whispering, "We saw her. That night. We saw what Mommy did." His brother nodded, eyes fixed on the floor, voice low but steady. "If we stay quiet, she goes to jail. We can't let that happen." The younger boy's lip trembled. "Daddy will hate us." The older whispered back, "He'll hate us more if we lie." The judge squinted from the bench. "What are those boys saying?" He tapped the gavel once, the sound echoing through the tense room. "Speak up." But before the children could answer, a voice rose from the gallery. An older man, the gardener, stood slowly, his cap in his hands. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Your Honor, I know that woman. I've worked beside her for years. She's no thief. She gave me her lunch more times than I can count. She'd rather go hungry than let someone else suffer." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The billionaire snapped his head around, his eyes blazing. "Sit down. This is irrelevant." The judge raised a hand. "Order. This court will hear no outbursts without cause." But the words had already set something loose. The gallery buzzed, the press scribbled faster, cameras clicked. The cracks were showing. Then another voice cut through. The nanny. She gripped her handbag tightly, her face pale but her eyes determined. "Your Honor, I saw something that night. The wife." She pointed with a trembling hand toward the billionaire's wife. "She went toward the laundry room after the gala. She looked around, thought no one was watching. But I saw her slip something into the maid's bag." The room gasped. The wife froze in her chair, her face stiff. The billionaire slammed his fist against the table, his voice thunderous. "Lies, every word of it. Do you people know who you're accusing?" He pointed at the maid, rage dripping from his tone. "She's guilty. End of discussion." The judge banged the gavel, the sound sharp, demanding order. "Quiet, or I will clear this courtroom." But the whispers didn't stop. The gallery had shifted. The weight of belief was tilting. At the front, the boys sat motionless, their little faces twisted in fear and determination. The older one pushed his chair back slowly. The sound of wood scraping the floor cut through the noise like thunder. He stood. His knees shook, but his voice rose clear. "Daddy, Mommy put it there." Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Heads turned, eyes wide. The younger boy clutched his brother's sleeve, then stood too, his tears streaking down his cheeks. His voice cracked as he shouted, "She's innocent. She never stole anything." Chaos broke loose. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashing wildly, pens scratching headlines before the words were even finished. The gallery roared with disbelief, voices overlapping in shock. "The kids! Did you hear that? They accused their own mother." The noise grew until it became a storm. The judge slammed the gavel over and over. "Order! Order in this court!" His voice strained to cut through the chaos, but nothing could silence the revelation that had just shattered the case. Two small voices had spoken louder than all the power in the room. The maid covered her mouth, tears streaming freely, her whole body shaking. For the first time, the eyes of the jury shifted toward her, with something different: sympathy. Belief. The billionaire's face drained of color, his fists pressed against the table as if force alone could hold back the truth. And his wife. She sat rigid, her mask cracking, the room closing in on her as the spotlight turned cruel. And in that moment, the courtroom was no longer his. It was theirs. The truth had been spoken, and nothing could put it back in silence. The billionaire's jaw dropped open. The courtroom, once under his control, was slipping from his hands like water he could no longer hold. For years, his voice had been the loudest, his money the final word. But now, two small voices had shattered the silence. His own sons. His empire of power suddenly felt fragile. The wife sat frozen beside him. Her face paled, the flush of glamour drained away in an instant. She pressed her hands against the edge of the table, nails digging into the wood. Her eyes darted from the jury to the judge to the gallery, searching desperately for someone, anyone, to believe her. Under her breath she whispered, sharp and cold, "Stop them. Now. Do something." But he didn't move. For the first time, the billionaire looked stunned, helpless. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Order! Order in the court!" His voice carried, but it couldn't drown the chaos. Gasps rolled like waves through the gallery. Reporters leaned over their desks, pens scratching furiously. Cameras clicked, bulbs flashing in rapid fire. A journalist whispered hoarsely into a recorder, "The sons just accused their own mother. Write it down. This is history." The older boy's chair screeched against the floor as he stepped forward. His small voice rang across the courtroom, stronger now. "We saw her. We saw Mommy put the bracelet in the bag." The gallery erupted. Someone shouted, "Did you hear that?" Another yelled, "The kid said it. Open your eyes." The sound swelled into a storm of disbelief, anger, shock. The gavel pounded again and again, but it was drowned out. The younger boy's chest heaved as he clung to his brother's sleeve. Tears cut streaks down his cheeks, but he forced the words out. "It's true. She's innocent. She never stole it." His little voice cracked, but it carried louder than the billionaire's money, louder than the wife's denial. The billionaire pressed his palms into his face, groaning, his shoulders heavy under the weight of the truth. His voice broke, raw and unsteady. "Stop. Just stop." Not the command of a king, but the plea of a man watching his world collapse. The wife slammed her hand on the table, her diamond bracelet rattling against the wood. Her voice shrieked above the noise. "They're lying. They're confused. They're just children. You can't trust this." She turned to the judge, her mask of elegance now cracked, desperation spilling out. "You can't let this stand." The judge's eyes narrowed. His gavel struck again, his voice firm, steady, unshaken. "This court will hear the truth, no matter whose mouth it comes from. Order, or I will clear this room." But there was no order. Not anymore. The gallery leaned forward, every ear straining for more. A reporter shouted into a recorder, "The maid's fate has turned. The boys have spoken against their own mother." Another scribbled furiously, "Family torn apart in front of the world." The older boy turned his eyes directly toward his father. His small face was wet with tears, but his words were steady, deliberate, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Daddy, why are you letting her take the blame? You know she didn't do it." The billionaire's lips parted, but no sound came. His son's eyes pierced deeper than any lawyer's question ever could. His hands trembled as he gripped the table, the weight of shame pressing him down. He had no defense, no command that could erase their words. The lawyers scrambled, papers flying, whispers spilling in frantic rushes. "We can spin this, we can call it confusion," but it was useless. No one was listening to them anymore. The wife's face hardened. She turned to her children, her voice dripping venom. "You don't understand what you're saying. Sit down." Her words cracked with fury, but the boys stood taller, their voices united now. "We saw you, Mommy. You put it there." The courtroom broke apart. Cries, gasps, shouts collided into one roaring storm. The judge slammed the gavel again and again, his voice echoing, "Order! Order!" But not even the wood and steel in his hand could silence the truth. And then, as if the chaos had swallowed itself whole, quiet fell. The gallery stilled. The reporters froze mid-sentence. Even the wife's protests died in her throat. The silence was heavier than the noise, heavier than the wealth stacked against the maid. In that silence, the truth stood naked, exposed, and undeniable. The judge sat back, eyes hard, gavel heavy in his hand. The silence pressed against the walls until he finally spoke. His voice was sharp, cutting through the still air. "This court has heard enough." He looked from the maid to the children, then to the wife whose face had gone pale. "All charges against the defendant are dismissed." The words hit like a release. The maid's knees gave way as she dropped to the floor, sobs breaking free. She covered her face, then reached out, pulling the boys into her arms. They clung to her, not as children holding on to a servant, but as sons holding on to the one person who had stood by them with love when no one else did. The gallery erupted. Some applauded, others gasped. Reporters shouted over one another. "Innocent! She's innocent!" Cameras flashed, headlines already writing themselves in ink and pixels. The sound of victory for truth drowned out the sound of wealth. The billionaire shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. His jaw was tight, his face drained. He stormed down the aisle, his expensive shoes striking hard against the tiles. Reporters shouted after him. "Sir, what do you say to the accusations? Sir, do you still believe she's guilty?" But he didn't answer. He pushed past them, his empire cracking in front of the world, his control slipping through his fingers with every step. The wife tried to stand, but the judge's gavel slammed again. "You will remain seated. This court will now consider charges of perjury and conspiracy." Her eyes widened, her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, she wasn't the accuser. She was the accused. The maid lifted her face, tears streaking her cheeks, and looked at the jury. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Thank you." The boys hugged her tighter, their voices trembling. We told them the truth." She kissed the tops of their heads, her voice breaking. "And that truth saved me." The judge cleared his throat, his final words carrying weight. "Justice has been served. This court is adjourned." The gavel struck one last time, the sound echoing like thunder rolling across the room. As the crowd poured out, the cameras followed the maid. She walked slowly, still holding the boys, but she didn't walk the way she had entered. She had entered alone, powerless, accused. Now she left surrounded by the voices that had defended her, voices that no amount of money could silence. The narrator's voice closed the chapter. She walked into court alone, accused and powerless, but walked out free, because innocence spoke louder than money. Sometimes justice doesn't come from wealth or power. It comes from the courage to tell the truth. The courtroom emptied, but the weight of what happened would never leave that room. A maid who had walked in powerless had left free. A billionaire who once thought himself untouchable walked out in shame. And two little boys had spoken a truth that money could never bury. Now let me ask you, if this story shook you, don't just keep scrolling. Hit that like button right now, subscribe for more real stories like this, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, if it was your kids in that courtroom, would they have stayed silent? Or stood up and told the truth? I read every single reply and I want to hear yours.